Well, it goes without saying that it is an incredible honour to be here to give you the, is it the 12th Roberts Lecture? It is something I would have never have dreamt of from those, I now see my friends from my time here sitting near the front, that 41 years after arriving here for what were a very mischievous 4 years, that I would be doing anything like what I'm doing now, but the idea that I would be actually welcomed back to the university to talk about anything is in itself a bit of a miracle, so it is a great honour. Let me also say thanks and congratulations to everybody involved in this, including Lady Roberts, of course, and to the various council leaders that I see are here also, who I shall come back to refer to also in a few minutes. And I'm sure there's many others that I should be paying tribute to, so I apologise to those, but I can't go any further with also in the spirit of how I started without mentioning a couple of human beings that had the dubious privilege of trying to guide me through my economics degrees here on the rare occasion that I would actually turn up in the building. I have no idea as to their whereabouts, but a gentleman called Professor Jim Ford deserves a sort of weird degree of praise for me and patience for having the belief in helping me go on to do postgraduate study here and beyond. And there was also a senior economics lecturer called Bob Sedgwick. That was one of the most patient human beings that I at least my memory can think of. So if any of you know either of those two gentlemen, please pass on my regards and thanks. I have to also say, and I'm going to come back to talk about this in the context of education skills, I'm also going to mention a very dear friend of ours. I see a couple of my close friends that have said, somewhat more tragically, a wonderful human being called Kevin Rogers that was in many ways the inspiration for my and others' naughtiness when we were here. Sadly passed away not much more than a couple of weeks ago, and we were all from the era of my time here at his funeral, which in itself was a fantastic statement of what this place somehow did for us all when we were here. And in that spirit, I thought I'd reflect on, before I show you a few pictures, I decided I'm going to show you a few slides, because 40 minutes of listening to somebody speak at this time of the day is pretty heavy going, so I'm going to use some, and now in saying that, you're going to think they're going to be like amusing slides. They're not. They're just slides with words on. But before I do that, I thought I'd also reflect a little back on the 1970s era when I was here as a student. And I found myself yesterday and this morning plowing through all sorts of Google searches. And I sort of, at one stage, Keith, I decided, you know what, I'm not going to do that, because those of you that have got good memories, I think us that were studying there were lost for many of this, but it was a pretty grim time, which I shall give you a few little highlights of. So my search for, interestingly in the context of something which is so topical. And by the way, when it comes to questions, before anybody thinks of asking me, I am not going to answer any question about the EU or Brexit. But coincidentally, of course, as I realized in doing this search, the year that just before we came here, in the summer of 1975, was the last time the country had a referendum about the EU. And it was a 67% vote in favour of joining. I don't know whether this is the scientific why it is the case, but it coincides with what is right now, what the bookmakers are suggesting is their guess of much more optimistic than the most recent opinion polls. But anyhow, that's one of the things I noticed about the year we came here. And one of the other more cheerful things that I reflect back on from that going through this search, that by the end of October, October the 31st was when Bohemian Rhapsody was released by Queen, which I think in many searches of the greatest single of all time, that is often up there. And I have to say it was certainly better than a lot of the other news that I found out of searches going around, some of which is quite grim. I think actually the day before that, rather sadly, and this continued throughout my time here, was the first of the horrible murders that became known as the Yorkshire Ripper. And looking at my colleagues here, I remember, especially for obviously for the female community, it was a pretty scary time as that developed, and there was periods of quite intensity. I don't think, I have to be careful here, but I don't think Sheffield per se was as crudely attacked in the way that Leeds and other places were, but of course there were evidence of events related to that here. And then, of course, beyond that, there was, and I thought it was important to say this for some of the younger people that might be here, because we meet tonight at a time where there is a lot of angst and fear about all sorts of things all over the world. But IRA bombings were a regular feature of the whole 3 years that we were here. I even managed to discover some evidence about a IRA bomb factory being found in Liverpool at the start of 1976. And if that wasn't bad enough, there was all sorts of strikes going on regularly. South Yorkshire was known as the People's Republic of South Yorkshire. And some people here would like that to be the case again today. And of course, the devolution deal, which I shall come back to, has some opportunity for people to take it down that path if they so choose. The culmination of the news was really bad. If I bring it a bit more to other more amusing matters, if those things weren't bad enough, it was an era where Liverpool were winning the league every year. But as my good friend Paul Humphreys sitting at the front there would know, that at least, even though Manchester United were pretty useless, generally speaking, we did beat them in the FA Cup final at that period. As for things in Sheffield, sticking with the football, the really good thing was, at least in our first year, was Sheffield United arguably at its pomp. Apologies to Blades fans here that it's not yet rediscovered since. That Tony Curry was in his heyday, and if I remember rightly, I think sadly for Sheffield United, Leeds United signed him at the end of that first year we were here. And that was the beginning of Sheffield United going in a different direction. And I know Alison, Paul's partner here, who's a Sheffield Wednesday lunatic, will kick me if I've got this one, but I think the Wednesday were already out of the First Division and not one of their more glorious periods. But it was also an era of a lot of big music going on here. Martin Fry, who I think has also been honoured from this university, actually shared digs with another one of my very dubious friends, and actually Mandy probably hung out with you for quite a while we were here. And I kind of remember Human League and other such bands appearing around the same time. So with that and the football that you touched on, Keith, we managed to ignore all this stuff going on around us and in the country and the world at large, which is a big way of saying that whatever is going on, you can always find hope and enjoyment and a path to a better future if you have the right focus. But you didn't, I don't think you invited me here to spend all my time talking about my memories of Sheffield. You invited me, if I can operate this, which, here we go, with a very provocative title. Can you see at the back? No? Oh, there are some, so there is obviously some very young people at the back, because as I joked with the staff earlier, I'm struggling to see this from here. But it allows me to tell you what bits of it I choose I want to and others not. But originally, when I asked what should I talk about, there was a bit of back and forth, and then I was given this very provocative title: Is the Northern Powerhouse political rhetoric or economic reality? And my immediate response to that is, well, I kind of hope it's not just political rhetoric, because if that is the case, I've possibly made the biggest single mistake of my professional life. Some of you that know me personally are aware of the fact I'm not especially obsessed with political parties. And I appeared in government purely for the purposes of helping to implement the Northern Powerhouse. So I am certainly there to make sure it isn't political rhetoric, and certainly hope it isn't. I can't resist in saying that the flip side of that, if it turns out to be, after what for me at least so far has only been 9 months in government, if it is political rhetoric, and once my not-so-sharp mind may end up realizing that, I can leave and get back to a normal, enjoyable life that I had before, if it turns out to be the case. But I hope to persuade you guys in the next half an hour or so that it is far from that. I'm going to come back to that in a second. But let me just sort of set the scene a bit. Keith touched on my role previously in chairing something called the Cities Growth Commission, which was an independent commission hosted by the RSA to look at what, if anything, could be done to rebalance economic growth in the United Kingdom and to do something about stopping the ever-growing dominance of London and the South East with the actual and perceived absolute as well as relative decline of other parts of the UK, of which the North was not the only focal point of ours, but a key part. And I'm sure the Chancellor himself might have some dispute with this, but I certainly believe that the whole Northern Powerhouse concept originated from what we did at the Cities Growth Commission, and I'll come back to talk about that in a bit more detail in a few moments. But importantly, I want to make it clear, because of some of the rather frankly amusing issues that go on in the media, the judgment as to whether it is a project linked to the title that I was given of lasting economic success or political rhetoric is pretty more seriously easy for me to answer, because of the things that we have already done and plan to do more of, which I'll talk about or give some flavour of in a minute. But most importantly, and for anybody that has lived through the 41 years since I first came to Sheffield and observed what's happened to our country and indeed the world, the truth of the matter is you will not, whether it's yourselves or anybody else or we, the government, be able to measure whether the Northern Powerhouse is a success or not for many years into the future. And in my view, the never-ending obsession of the media to do that in this 24/7 world we live is pretty pathetic. And if I take it to the third comment there in particular, this rather recent, somewhat amusing analysis of the reported 2014 so-called GVA, gross value added data, that, if it's accurate, shows that the income differentials between London and the north have widened further. That, as supposed evidence that the Northern Powerhouse project is not working, is particularly pathetic, because the first time the phrase Northern Powerhouse was actually used by the Chancellor was not until the middle of 2014. So it would be pretty spectacular for something which is a long-term project to have had impact before it even came into existence. So those of you with friends in the media, please make them aware of, even by their standards, they are underperforming their focus of reality. Let me also add, as I lead into this next chart, a slightly different tone in saying that, because despite what I just said, from my perspective, it is not necessarily a bad thing that the media is constantly questioning, as are others, aspects of the Northern Powerhouse commitment and success. Because actually, compared with many other thematic ideas, including economic policies, the attention and the imagination that the Northern Powerhouse idea has garnered is actually very successful. If you could see this chart, what it shows you is some numbers that came from a ComRes opinion poll, which the BBC, I think, requested and had sanctioned around November of last year. And I cannot resist in having a dig at the media again, that in typical BBC and other media fashion of this current time of life, they present, I was actually being ironically interviewed on the Today programme the day of this poll, because it was the day we were doing the devolution deal in Liverpool. And their headline was, only 2 out of 5 people are aware of what the Northern Powerhouse is, which, having played around with statistics, influenced by the great education I had here in Sheffield, of course, what that means is that 60% were aware. And I tried to point out to the journalists that asked me that, compared with virtually any other awareness about any economic policy focus of government throughout the whole of my lifetime, that is a ridiculously high number. And in fact, amazingly, talking to some of my colleagues in the Treasury who were putting these slides together for me, I didn't know this, so I guess probably many of you don't. Apparently, it is typically the case that only 70% of those asked at any moment in time actually know the name of the serving Prime Minister. So if it is the fact that 60% of the people who were quizzed knew what the Northern Powerhouse was, actually that's scarily high for something which is in its infancy. Linked to the flavour of what you said a minute ago, Keith, in your kind introduction, below the surface of that headline, the thing that I think was particularly encouraging from what was just one opinion poll, but if it's accurate, really important, is that when they broke the questions down to age groups, the younger people, as evidenced here by, I think it's the 18 to 24-year-olds, were particularly enthused about what it might mean for their own futures. And I'll come back, this is where I'll come back for making my formal comments and stop in time for Q&A. Amongst the reasons why you cannot really test whether the Northern Powerhouse is a success or not for many, many years in the future is that unless it helps change the lives and opportunities and outcomes for the youth of today, then it won't be. But the fact that young people seem to be, in such a poll, more excited about it than older people, in an era where most young people are not that excited about anything that comes out of people in government in most parts of the world, I personally think is a rather important sign. And it's something which, at least in my own small role in trying to develop the momentum of focus and success and policy, it is the aspirations of our younger people that I think are particularly important. The bottom end of this chart shows you some evidence, also interestingly and encouragingly, more recently, that came from a survey of small business people done under the leadership of the Federation of Small Business, which quite staggeringly had 93% of small business owners in the north of England had said that they had heard of it, and half of those believe that it would have a positive impact on their business. And I also highlight that because it is probably the case that it is the success of thousands of small businesses in the future that will determine the overall success of our country's economy, and with it the success or lack of success of our lives and our wealth. So that's sort of the first part of, is it a political project or is it something to think about seriously as an economics goal? And so hopefully I've given you a flavour, but linked to the second part of that, I'm now going to turn it into what actually is it all about, especially from where we are 18 months after the Chancellor first introduced the term, what is coming next in terms of our focus. But again, and apologies to those of you in council leadership positions here and crucial and from the LEP, crucially involved in all of this, because some of this is like, oh my God, we've heard him say this stuff so many times. It will only be the first bit of the rest of what I'm going to say. But I'm doing it because I'm sure the rest of you may not be aware of this. So the underlying concept really behind the Northern Powerhouse is based on the following observations. And this is coming from somebody, as Keith touched on, that for much of the previous 30 years, especially the near 20 I was at Goldman Sachs, was immersed in the changing nature of the world economy and the staggering rise of China, India, and various other places, which importantly, in most cases, if not all, has been dominated by the growth of their cities. And if you look at the UK today in a global context, London is the only city in Britain that appears in the top 25 in terms of size of global cities. And it's only just about in there. But it's a great thing, and let me also make it clear in that regard, Cities Commission's focus, as is its carryover for me and more importantly for the Chancellor in the Northern Powerhouse project, is not to promote the Northern Powerhouse at London's expense. In fact, if anything, it's to try and explore what are there things that have helped London be as big and successful as it is that you can somehow try and replicate and bring to the north of England. But importantly, in thinking about it and influencing how that commission worked and the carryover to government, other than London, there is no other British city that actually appears in the top 100 of global cities, with the possible exception of Greater Manchester. And if you thought of Birmingham in a West Midlands sense, they would just about creep in. But no, if you actually just thought about Manchester as a city without the greater part and Birmingham itself, they would struggle to be in the top 100. And the thing which is so intriguing, and it could just be coincidence. If you look at the world economies generally regarded as most successful economies, take three, the United States, China, and Germany, three very different places, all with different natural value-added skills and strengths to the world. One of the things they all share is a lot of important cities, whereas the UK is dominated by London. And the thing that started to register in our minds, which was so obvious, is that if you actually look at the cities that radiate to the west and north of here, or what I ended up very inelegantly calling Man-Sheff Leedspool, the radius of those four places, or the radius of the three surrounding Manchester, and the various towns and areas that are between them, actually collectively in terms of people, is not dissimilar to that of London. And in economics parlance, you would describe that as the concept of agglomeration. And so if you could introduce things that could bring all the people more together, both as consumers and producers, perhaps that could result in all sorts of economic benefits for the 10 million or so people that you're talking about. And even though there are, and I'll come on to this in a minute, very understandable great sensitivities to other places in the north of England, what makes the Northern Powerhouse project so unique and therefore getting the attention that it is getting is because of that reality of the closeness of those cities. And those of you that are from Hull and Newcastle are probably now sharpening your darts and getting your tomatoes out ready to throw at me. And of course, I'm quickly going to add, because it is true, the Northern Powerhouse project is indeed a project to help the whole of the north of England, but what makes it, which is not the same of what I've just said, what makes it unique is the closeness of those cities. And if we can't bring out the combined economies of scale that exist of those cities and the places between them, then in 10 years' time, probably more like 20 to 30 years' time, the verdict will look back and say, it has not been a success. And I would be one to hold up my hand if I'm still around long enough to acknowledge that. But that is really what is at the core of this concept. And here are some numbers to just show you the scale of why this is an important way to operate. I'm sure very few of you towards the back of the room can see these numbers, but what these are actually, we have 2014 data. I don't know why I've chose 2013. It was probably just quicker for me to pull off. But this is so-called gross value added, or the economic size of these different places. And the illustration of the chart is to show you that London's gross value added, at least according to this data, in 2013 is £338 billion, which is nearly twice the next 10 largest cities put together. So it is pretty striking and also remarkably unique in anywhere in the OECD in terms of that degree of concentration. So if that's what's at the core of the concept, what are the things that are important that have been getting focus and are going to get more focus in terms of trying to do something about it? And this is a simple list of the key things. The first of which, of course, is devolution. Let me just quickly jump back to this chart. The other thing which is unique about the UK in the most developed countries is not only do we have the degree of relative domination that London has compared to other parts of the country, it may be a complete coincidence, it may be, and one should not dismiss that possibility, but we are also the most centrally ran country in the whole of the OECD. So in terms of government spending and money raised from our citizens, there is nowhere in the rest of the OECD, at least until 18 months ago, that was anything like as centralized in terms of how the country's finances were raised and spent. Might be a coincidence, and a valid argument that some people say is that that hasn't stopped London being as big and brash and as successful as it seemingly is. So, as I shall go on to talk about more now, devolution in itself, the first point I make here, is indeed a necessity in terms of succeeding with rebalancing the economy and specifically to helping the Northern Powerhouse succeed, but it shouldn't be regarded as the only thing that matters. There are plenty of other things that are equally as important as that. But I said at the start I wanted to come back and give further acknowledgement to Sheffield city leaders, and this is where I am going to do it. It was a great personal joy for me that after I joined government, the first additional place that we agreed the principle of a devolution deal was with yourselves. And so for Steve Houghton, I see sitting there, Julie Dorr with him, John Mothersole, other people I'm sure who are here I don't see, and I apologize to you. For all of you, I publicly, in front of everybody else, like to congratulate you for your ambition and your boldness in being there. And as you know, but I want to make it clear to the broader audience here, that is the beginning of devolution, not the end. And if you look over the Pennines, you will see that we've already done 2 further deals on top of the initial deal with Greater Manchester. And if you guys are in a position to agree your deal before the budget, we would hope to be in a position to give the Sheffield City region a further deal for the budget in just over 3 weeks' time. And it's a very important part of the puzzle, in my opinion, to give local elected leaders who, in many cases, have a much greater genuine awareness of what the answers are to local puzzles, especially when it comes to skills and employment, for them to have ownership of the keys so long as they're prepared to take the accountability that goes with it. And that is a very important part of what we are up to. And there is going to be more places we are encouraging devolution on. And very importantly, to repeat what I've just said, on the kind of things that will be devolved in the deals, this is the beginning of it and nowhere near the end. And frankly, where it ends up as to what could ultimately be devolved, I don't think anybody knows, and nobody should have a rigid view as to what it should be. It will depend on the evidence and the persuasiveness of everybody involved. The second thing which is critical, linked to this agglomeration theory and linking places together, is transport. And I thought I'd show you what I think are at least some amusing bits of data, but things which I think are quite powerful. So according to what I got over the weekend off, was there a life before Google? Yourselves to Leeds, according to what I found, is 35 miles. That is 7 miles less than the length of the Metropolitan Tube line in London. Manchester to Sheffield is 40 miles, which is 4 miles less than the length of the Piccadilly line. Manchester to Liverpool, 35 miles shorter than the District line. And to complete the picture, Manchester to Leeds, which according to that is the one that's slightly the longest, is actually shorter than the length of the Central line. I perhaps should have done this differently by undertaking a quiz and asking you which of those 4 tube lines do you think is the longest in London? But obviously, the point is, one of the reasons why London succeeds in the way that it does is that you have a transport system that links all these people up over a very large space of territory. And so one of the big ambitions, which we are not going to give all the government contributions to solving in this budget, by the way, but we will be doing more, is to somehow replicate that connectivity between northern cities. And importantly, because Newcastle and the North East are central to the Northern Powerhouse, they are just as important to the consideration as the Man-Sheff-Leeds pool. Those of you, and actually here's an aside, as a sign of Sheffield's importance in all of this, I think I'm right in saying, I just realised, Keith, that on the Northern Powerhouse trip to China late last year, there were more representatives from Sheffield than anywhere else in the north of England, which is yourself, Julie, and John. And I think that is right. But those of you were you all together when we ended up in a city called Chengdu, which is twinned with Sheffield, which is in the middle of their so-called, or their version of what they're trying to create as a Western powerhouse. And over a lunch we had there, I was busy chatting with the mayor of another big city. And he pointed out that from Chengdu to Chongqing, which is actually today the biggest city in China, is 166 miles, and they already have a high-speed bullet train that takes 2 hours. So it is 60 miles longer than from Manchester to Newcastle, and already 20 minutes faster. And so if we want to explore truly the agglomeration benefits, both as a consumer and a producer, of all these people in the north, we have to make sure that the transport system allows people to get around a lot more efficiently and cost-effectively than they have done for anybody here's lifetime. Let me also add in this regard, because I see occasionally some cynical comments made in the media in the north about the idea of a northern oyster, because I think people don't fully understand this in a London context. I'm sure everybody here knows what the Oyster card is. There is evidence that since the Oyster was introduced in London to make it easier to connect between all these different forms of transport in London, tube, train, bus, and probably something else I can't think of, maybe even the tram in Croydon, I don't know, there has been a 20% increase in the amount in which London inhabitants move around in that greater London area, which in itself is the core argument as to why the economies of scale of this agglomeration involving transport should be pursued. And so that is why we as a government specifically have already given Transport for the North, a new entity to help create this, money to develop the concept of contactless Oyster card type travel, and we will be doing more to make sure that is a focus point of those that are leading that long-term ambition, because it is crucial to the success of that plan. Oops. Let me now spend the last 5 minutes or so about, and it's very fitting for this wonderful building and my background and the purpose of this institution, to do with education and skills. Because so far, most of the attention in terms of policy and debates has been about devolution and transport, by and large, with some focus on skills, and obviously, as part of the Sheffield City region, skills devolution, or partial skills devolution, I say before Julie Dore throws something at me, has already been part of the deal. But going back to what I said at the start, the future of our young people is going to be the absolute key as to whether this will ultimately be a success or not. And I have to say, I don't know how many of you heard this on the radio this morning or read it in any of your newspapers, but there's been a rather, in my judgment, helpful intervention from the current head of Ofsted, Mr. Michael Wilshaw, in the past 24 hours, who, in Michael's amicable way, has rather vocally pointed out that the Northern Powerhouse has no chance of any success unless we improve the educational outcomes, especially in his judgment, or at least at what he was reported to have said, in our secondary schools. And I'm sure some of you know, maybe a lot of you know, but it is pretty clear from the data that is available that using the standard measures, that's my phone, I apologize. Using the standard measures, we can, for the sake of the discussion now, don't want to get into debate as to whether they're right measures or not, that in aggregate, the Northern Powerhouse area, and by that I mean the whole of the North, significantly underperforms on secondary school outcomes. And we have been quite focused on something called, which appears to have been a great success in London, called the London Challenge, which about 15 to 20 years ago was introduced as a deliberate initiative to dramatically boost the educational attainment of London schools. A lot of people, especially if you don't live there, are not aware of this, but it has not always been the case that educational attainment in London has been as good as it now is. In fact, in the first decade or so, I ended up living there from leaving this part of the world. London schools badly underperformed the rest of the country. But things have changed so much that we have gone the other way. And without, because I'd get into trouble if I did, telling you exactly what is going to be in the budget about this, not least because it's not all decided yet, we are going to try and explore some version of replicating bits of that appear to have been quite successful in terms of the focus of London Challenge to the Northern Powerhouse as a region, and we will try to probably specifically home in on the areas of the North where the evidence is the greatest that the most improvement needs to take place. And there are all sorts of initiatives about that. I thought I was going to show you the slide, but in the event of people taking pictures and twittering about it, I didn't want to have this one on there, but I will give you some of my own personal colour on that as well, thinking about the importance of this issue. Where I was raised in Manchester, from the age of my attending my primary school through to when I left, I would say I kind of had a core group of friends. There was just 8 of us. We were kind of sad. We didn't have many friends. But of that core 8, when I reflect back, only 2 of the 8 of us went to university. And interestingly, and I went to a pretty tough primary school. The 2 of us that did happened to be the 2 at the same primary school, but we were also the only 2 that I know of that then went to the secondary school after junior that actually were lucky enough or capable enough or forced by our parents to go on public transport to our secondary school. Now that could have been complete coincidence, but at the core of what appears to have been successful in the London Challenge is the aspirations and support of families in making sure their children get a better education. It is also the case of the 20 or so core crowd, I think, of my life here at Sheffield University, if you take it to tertiary level. There were only 2 of us that stayed in Sheffield, and they're both sitting here tonight. And I can't resist by saying that you were 40 years ahead of the rest of us with your vision as to the benefits and opportunities. Because another area of focus that is getting a lot of our attention, and it may feature in ideas for this budget, it might be too soon, but it will certainly feature more going forward, is what can be done to not just encourage greater retention of the brightest people to stay in where they were educated, but just as importantly, and the more I think about this, how do you actually attract them as what you might call regional immigrants to come? A number of universities in the north of England, and I think it's true also with yourself, Keith, are very proud of your record of retaining students. But what is really needed, along with the ambition of attracting exciting new employers, the Googles, the Amazons, new value-added manufacturing companies to help your extremely exciting advanced manufacturing park become the source of significant value-added employment, is to have people from elsewhere wanting to come and move here. And they are, in addition to focusing on things to do with primary and secondary schooling outcomes, that we are trying to think about as to whether there are interventions or not that government might be able to pursue to help that. And I'm going to stop there because I've talked already. Actually, when I was preparing for this, I was thinking, how the hell am I going to talk for 40 minutes? But I think I started a bit late, and I've talked for longer. But I deliberately wanted to end up with education from primary through tertiary because of the personal good luck that I've had from it, and knowledge that without that, for all young people that are born and raised in this part of the world, and those that have the good luck of coming here to study, without those people having the right skills, the Northern Powerhouse won't be a success. But with the right focus and the right attention and support from us and all your elected policymakers in the region, it will. Thank you.